In the early hours of the morning, a single statement from Washington immediately reshaped the global conversation. According to U.S. officials, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro was no longer governing from Caracas, but had allegedly been taken into U.S. custody during a coordinated operation. The claim spread rapidly across international media, not because of dramatic imagery or spectacle, but because of what it implied: a direct challenge to the authority of a sitting head of state. What makes this situation especially complex is not just the announcement itself, but the layers of uncertainty surrounding it. While U.S. leaders described the operation as controlled and limited, reports emerging from Venezuela painted a far less clear picture. Social media filled with unverified footage showing power outages, heavy aerial activity, and disturbances near strategic locations in and around Caracas. At the same time, Venezuelan officials rejected the U.S. narrative entirely, calling the action an illegal breach of national sovereignty. According to publicly available statements from the U.S. administration, the operation followed months of planning and coordination across military, intelligence, and law enforcement agencies. Officials stated that the objective was to detain Nicolas Maduro based on long-standing criminal indictments filed in U.S. courts. These allegations, which include claims related to international drug trafficking and weapons violations, have been denied repeatedly by Maduro and his allies, who argue that they are politically motivated. As the announcement unfolded, Venezuelan authorities declared a national emergency and deployed armed forces to what they described as key defensive positions. Government spokespeople claimed that several regions had been affected and accused foreign forces of targeting both military and civilian infrastructure. These claims, however, have not yet been independently verified, and details remain limited due to restricted access and rapidly changing conditions. Meanwhile, U.S. officials maintained that the operation was narrowly focused and avoided unnecessary escalation. They emphasized that no large-scale military occupation had taken place and described the events as part of a law enforcement action supported by security assets. This contrast in narratives immediately raised questions among analysts and observers worldwide. If Nicolas Maduro was indeed removed from power, who now controls the Venezuelan state? According to statements made in Washington, senior Venezuelan officials were contacted in the aftermath of the operation, and interim governance arrangements were discussed. However, opposition leaders inside and outside Venezuela argue that the country's political future should be determined by previously disputed election results, not foreign intervention. As global reactions began to surface, it became clear that this was no longer a regional issue. Major world powers issued statements expressing concern, condemnation, or cautious observation. Some framed the events as a dangerous precedent for international law, while others focused on the accusations against Maduro and the broader implications for security in the region. At this stage, one thing is certain: the story is still unfolding. Key facts remain disputed. Multiple versions of events are circulating, and the consequences of this moment are far from fully understood. What initially appeared to be a single announcement is now evolving into a defining geopolitical test, one that could reshape alliances, norms, and expectations for years to come. And this is only the beginning. As more details began to surface, attention shifted from the announcement itself to the mechanics behind it. According to U.S. officials, the operation was described as the result of prolonged intelligence gathering, with timing carefully selected to minimize uncertainty and broader disruption. Officials stated that weather conditions, regional traffic patterns, and internal security movements were all factors considered in advance. While these claims were presented as evidence of precision, independent confirmation remains limited. Reports attributed to U.S. defense sources suggest that multiple air and maritime assets were positioned across the region during the same time window. These movements, according to analysts, may explain why residents in parts of Caracas reported unusual sounds and temporary power disruptions. However, experts caution that such reports do not automatically indicate widespread military action, as similar effects can result from routine security maneuvers or infrastructure stress. Several locations quickly became the focus of public discussion. Airports, ports, and military facilities near the capital were mentioned repeatedly by both U.S. and Venezuelan officials. From a strategic perspective, these sites play a critical role in mobility and communication, making them logical points of attention during any high-level security operation. Still, neither side has released a complete, verifiable timeline of events, leaving gaps that continue to fuel speculation. At the same time, international intelligence observers noted a noticeable increase in diplomatic traffic. Emergency meetings were reportedly convened across multiple capitals, and statements were issued with carefully measured language. Allies of Venezuela framed the situation as a violation of sovereignty, while others emphasized the importance of accountability and regional stability. Notably, several governments avoided taking a definitive position, instead calling for restraint and independent verification of claims. Inside Venezuela, the information environment became increasingly fragmented. State media emphasized resistance and continuity, while opposition channels described the moment as a turning point. For many citizens, access to reliable information remained inconsistent, making it difficult to distinguish confirmed developments from rumor. Analysts note that in situations like this, control of the narrative can be just as influential as control of institutions. One of the most closely watched questions concerns governance. U.S. officials suggested that communication had taken place with senior figures inside the Venezuelan government regarding continuity and cooperation. However, no formal, internationally recognized transition framework has been presented. This uncertainty has prompted debate over legitimacy, authority, and the role of external actors in shaping outcomes. Economic implications also began to surface almost immediately. Energy markets reacted cautiously, with analysts assessing how changes in leadership or prolonged instability could affect oil production and exports. Statements from U.S. leadership indicated an intention to support infrastructure recovery and economic normalization, though specifics remain undefined. Critics argue that such discussions are premature, without clarity on political legitimacy and legal processes. As hours turned into days, it became clear that the situation could not be understood through a single lens. Legal arguments, security concerns, humanitarian considerations, and geopolitical rivalry are now tightly interwoven. Each new statement adds context, but also raises new questions. Observers agree on one point: the outcome will likely influence how future international actions are judged and justified. What happens next depends not only on decisions made in Washington or Caracas, but on how the global community responds. Will international institutions assert a mediating role? Will regional alliances shift? Or will this moment settle into prolonged uncertainty, defined more by competing narratives than clear resolutions? Those answers are not yet available. But the signals emerging now suggest that this event is less about a single operation and more about the rules that govern power, legitimacy, and intervention in a changing world. As the international response continued to unfold, the focus gradually shifted from immediate events to longer-term consequences. Global institutions, including the United Nations, issued carefully worded statements expressing concern and urging restraint, dialogue, and respect for international norms. While no unified position emerged, the volume and speed of diplomatic engagement signaled that many governments viewed this moment as a potential inflection point rather than an isolated incident. Legal experts began examining the implications of prosecuting a sitting or recently removed head of state in a foreign court. Supporters of the U.S. position emphasized existing indictments and judicial processes, arguing that accountability mechanisms were already in place. Critics countered that the circumstances surrounding the detention could complicate legal proceedings and set controversial precedents. At this stage, much depends on how courts interpret jurisdiction, due process, and the sequence of events leading up to the alleged arrest. Within Venezuela, uncertainty remained the defining feature. Government institutions continued to operate publicly, but questions persisted about command structures, decision-making authority, and international recognition. Opposition figures called for clarity and transparency, urging that any transition reflect the will expressed in previous electoral processes. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens faced practical concerns: access to services, economic stability, and reliable information, as the political landscape shifted around them. Regional dynamics also came into sharper focus. Neighboring countries weighed the risks of spillover effects, including migration pressures and economic disruption. Some leaders emphasized non-intervention as a core principle, while others framed the situation as part of a broader effort to combat transnational crime. These differing interpretations revealed underlying tensions within regional alliances and highlighted the challenge of forming a coordinated response. Energy markets and global businesses continued to monitor developments closely. Venezuela's role as a major energy producer means that political uncertainty can ripple outward, affecting supply expectations and investment decisions. While some statements suggested future cooperation and rebuilding, analysts stressed that meaningful economic change would require stability, legitimacy, and sustained international engagement, conditions that cannot be created overnight. As days passed, media coverage evolved from breaking news to analysis. The initial shock gave way to deeper questions about power, accountability, and the balance between sovereignty and international enforcement. Commentators noted that similar situations in the past often produced long-lasting consequences, not only for the countries directly involved, but for the norms governing international relations. What stands out most is how much remains unresolved. Conflicting accounts persist, official confirmations are limited, and the situation continues to develop. For observers around the world, this moment serves as a reminder that global politics rarely moves in straight lines. Decisions made behind closed doors can have far-reaching effects, shaping narratives and policies long after headlines fade. Understanding this event requires patience and context rather than quick conclusions. As more verified information becomes available, the broader picture may become clearer. Until then, the story of Venezuela's political turning point remains open, defined not by a single announcement, but by the choices that follow. When history looks back on moments like this, it rarely focuses on the announcement itself. Instead, it examines what changed afterward, the rules that were tested, the lines that were crossed or reinforced, and the precedents that quietly took shape. The situation surrounding Venezuela now appears to be entering that phase, where interpretation may matter as much as outcome. Analysts have begun comparing this episode to earlier moments in international politics, where legal authority, military capability, and political legitimacy overlapped in uncomfortable ways. In several past cases, initial actions were framed as exceptional or necessary, only to later influence how similar situations were handled elsewhere. Whether this moment follows that pattern remains uncertain, but the comparisons underline why so many governments are watching closely. One of the most significant questions moving forward is how international law will be applied in practice, not just in theory. If accountability is pursued across borders, under what conditions is it considered legitimate? Who decides when legal processes outweigh sovereignty, and how are those decisions reviewed? These are not abstract concerns. They shape how power is exercised in a global system built on both cooperation and competition. For Venezuela itself, the coming period will likely be defined less by dramatic events and more by difficult choices. Political stability, economic recovery, and social cohesion depend on trust, institutions, and credible pathways forward. Regardless of leadership outcomes, rebuilding confidence, both domestically and internationally, will be a long-term challenge. At the same time, this moment may influence how states respond to allegations of transnational crime, corruption, and abuse of power in the future. Some may see it as a warning, others may view it as a justification. Either way, the implications extend beyond a single country or administration. What is clear is that the global response will help determine whether this episode becomes an exception or a reference point. Silence, endorsement, opposition, or mediation each send different signals. And those signals taken together shape expectations about what actions are considered acceptable in moments of crisis. For viewers trying to make sense of rapidly changing headlines, the most important takeaway is context. Complex international events rarely offer simple heroes or villains. They unfold through layers of law, politics, and human consequence, often long after the cameras move on. In the next video, we'll take a closer look at historical cases that echo elements of this situation, not to draw direct comparisons, but to better understand how today's decisions may influence tomorrow's norms. If you want to continue following this story with clarity and depth, that's where we'll go next.